we are today here to talk about the body, and we have three wonderful speakers. We have Aleah Chapin, Adelaide Damoah, and Corinna Wagner, who are joining us from lots of different places. We're in different time zones. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Elina Cerla. I organise the dialogues, and it's a pleasure to have everybody here. I always start the conversation with a short introduction to our topic, and so I'm going to start today. And it's never easy, but today our topic is vast, so please forgive me if I only touch on the surface of many important issues. Our experience of the world takes place through our bodies. The body is the closest to one point, a unique place where we attach our visible identities. And so we often assume that our body is unequivocally under our own control. It belongs to us. And yet our body is the place where the personal and the political intersect, where countless power relations manifest. And it legally doesn't even always belong to us. It isn't surprising then that the body in art has often been where the dynamics at play in a society become apparent, and why the body is such a powerful vehicle for constructing meaning. These dynamics are often the expression of political power, and the conventions surrounding the representation of the body are hugely charged. In short, the body in representation is never neutral, and it's our responsibility as artists to be aware of that. Of course, the body in art is such a broad topic that today I'll start by introducing some notions around the body specific to the Western art historical canon, and by doing so, touch upon some wider politics at play in this problematic conception. But I'm sure that we'll come back to the body in future dialogues because it's such a vast topic. This notion of the use of the body in art brings us to the divide between what's known as the division between naked and nude, famously coined by Kenneth Clark and critically questioned many a time. It's a divide that stubbornly persists despite the numerous problems it engenders and the antiquated cultural values that it's predicated on. To summarize, for Clark, the naked is more a base form of the body that implies a sense of embarrassment and discomfort. It's real and raw and easy to imagine with all its smells and substances, and to quote him, huddled and defenseless. By opposition, the nude, and quoting him again, is a balanced, prosperous, and confident body, the body reformed. And it's free of imperfections. He quickly and tellingly goes on to add, and to quote him again, no nude should fail to arouse the spectator, in the spectator, some vestige of erotic feeling. So the nude is clothed by art, and at the same time is fundamentally a locus of idealization and even fantasy. Although Clark starts by talking about the nude as both male and female, it quickly becomes apparent in his analysis that the nude is predominantly a woman whose body has been forged by and for the heterosexual male viewer. John Berger's seminal analysis in Ways of Seeing begins to unpick the problems of this supine and subjugated female nude with averted eyes and a passivity so specific to the European tradition. To quote him, in the average European oil painting of the nude, the principal protagonist is never painted. He is the spectator in front of the picture, and he is presumed to be a man. And he's also quite often the owner of the work. As we can see, the nude is laying bare the cultural conventions and convictions of the society in which it is made. The viewer becomes the white male protagonist, and the objectified nude woman becomes an object to be consumed by him. Underlying these conventions are dangerous normative structures that betray both hetero-cis normativity and white normativity. Linda Neal, in her classic book, The Female Nude, begins to unveil the power dynamics present in the naked body. And it's interesting to note how heavily charged with cultural values and biases, even anatomical representations of the body are, that are supposedly scientific and objective. So the power dynamics infuse all forms of representation. It's soon clear that certain bodies are excluded from the canonical structures of beauty, or are simply not considered to be the subjects of art. The older body, the black body, the body that doesn't satisfy the idealized form or normative ideas of gender and sexuality. All of these are expulsed from the cultural tradition, and the body that remains is predominantly an objectified, sometimes explicitly sexualized body, a body that implies ownership by someone else and is distorted to conform to their narratives and fantasies. Artist Claudette Johnson wrote, and these are her words, "The experience of near annihilation is the ghost that haunts the lives of Black women in Britain daily. The price of our survival has been the loss of our sense of ownership, of both land and body. Our sexuality has been the focus of grotesque myths and imaginings." So we return to the notion of who owns the body and who the viewer of the work is. It always saddens and frightens me how much work being made today betrays a lack of awareness of, or a willing disregard for, the inherent politics of power taking place in the act of representation. It's through our bodies that we interact with others, and the assumed hermetic unity of a body becomes especially significant when it's a tool for relational expression, a tool of nuances, exchange and interaction, and violence. And here the seal of the body is less isolated as once thought. The body is particularly powerful when looking at the borders it embodies. We find ourselves confronted with the private and the political again, the inside and the outside, and the anatomy of the body becomes a liminal space where renegotiation takes place. According to Neil, and to quote her, "Power lies at the margins of socially constructed categories, for it's here that meaning is called into question and challenged." The 1960s and 70s saw many power structures being questioned by feminism and the civil rights movement. Although some artists choose to push at the limits of representation, it's not surprising that others turn to their own bodies as a source of making work. To use their own body was to claim control over it, to create embodied empowerment. And yet this too showed the art world to be a bastion of white power. As Ana Mendieta put it, and to quote her own words, "As non-white women, our struggles are twofold." She also said, during the mid to late 60s, as women in the United States politicized themselves and came together in the feminist movement with the purpose to end the domination and exploitation by the white male culture, they failed to remember us. I hope this introduction has at least brought to light how highly charged the body is as a source of identity, politics, and social values, as well as the importance of understanding what relational assumptions about the subject, the maker, the viewer, artworks themselves embody. As I said, it's a huge topic and it's impossible to do anything but skim over the surface in such a short time. But I hope we'll be able to unpack some of these ideas and many others in our conversation today. On this note, I'd like to turn to our wonderful speakers, Aleah Chapin, Adelaide Damoah, and Corinna Wagner. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm going to start with a question to each of the speakers, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us. So I think I'm going to start with Corinna. You've explored notions of the body and representation in many contexts. To start off with, could you tell us about the anatomical body and how it's encoded worldviews and notions of gender and the idea of socio-political historical context?
So, I've been very, very interested, as some of you know, in how artists and visual artists as well as literary artists turn to anatomy at a certain point in history, and that point would be, and again, we're talking, everything's going to be big during tonight. It would be the early modern period, and by the time we get to the end of the 18th century, early 19th century, anatomy is a central, if not, it's a must in artistic study. Now, the reason this interests me so much is because the turn towards anatomy not only gave us realism and naturalism, it also, and ways of working, a dissective eye and techniques which really wanted to penetrate the body and show the body in new and very unvarnished ways. But it also allowed artists to raise and address a bunch of really important perennial questions that we still grapple with. And speaking about big, these are big, like, how do our bodies work? I always turn to a really, I think, quite a fascinating quote by Nietzsche, where he says, we don't even understand how our digestive system works. We're sitting here and we don't understand how our nerves are firing. How can we then possibly really understand the human? We can't even understand those things fully. And along with that, what is it like to live in another body? When I look out and I look at red or blue or shapes, do you see the same ones? How do I know what it is that you see? And if I don't understand what it's like to live in another body, then how do each of us understand those intangible things that go on within bodies? What are you thinking right now? What are your motives? Do you have criminal thoughts? Do you have sexual thoughts? What is your character? What is your intelligence? We always want to know these things about others, about humans. And those kinds of terms, character and intelligence, should give you a sense that this is also a long sweep of history that involves the medical, scientific realms fusing with, or in conversation with, the artistic realms. In the same way that novelists want to get into the psyche, want to dissect the psyche, as it were, in the same way that artists study anatomy and want to represent the anatomy in ways that are persuasive, realistic, or get us to feel something or to engage in certain ways. So to have criminologists, phrenologists, psychologists also turn to the body in order to understand the interior and in order to know what is going on inside. And what is the nature of mind-body relationships? And precisely how do environments shape our minds and our bodies? And how do representations of the body in the past then impinge on or shape new or modern ways of representing the body? So those kinds of questions are all involved with this turn towards anatomy. And when we get the turn towards anatomy, we get this sort of bleeding of all kinds of things into each other. So beauty becomes connected with rational and supposedly scientific ways of representing bodies, for instance. And of course, gender and race and all of these other factors become connected with how bodies are represented both in medical realms as well as in artistic realms. And it's that relationship between those things that I'm really, really interested in.
I'm really interested, Aleah, in your Aunties series and the way that you represent the body of, and the beauty of the older female body. And it's interesting that although quite a lot of the eyes are reverted in some of the subjects of your paintings, it's not a sign of submission. There's an incredible strength and comfort in mating from them. And I just wanted to know more about how those images evolve and the collaboration with the models, and however you want to kind of push that open.
Yeah, thanks for having me here, and also thank you all for joining us here. So I actually just wanted to begin by bringing up the name of these dialogues, dialogues for artists in a changing world. Our world is really changing. It's always changing, and it's changing, but we are also the change. It changes because we change. And I started this work back in 2011 when I was in graduate school. And, you know, I was in New York City. I was trying to be a serious artist. I was very lost about what I wanted to say, what I wanted to do with my work. And, you know, I think what I was seeing in the art world, you know, let alone magazines and just the rest of the world, but in the art world was just a certain type of beauty scene. I'm talking about the figurative art world here, of course. In the figurative art world, there's really just one type of body shown. And that was kind of boring to me. I just didn't feel like it was really, it just wasn't helpful. It wasn't interesting. It caused me my own issues. And so I started painting these paintings because of kind of a personal crisis of, I don't know what I want to say, but then also just, I need to put out into the world what I need to see, which is images of real people and real bodies. So, but of course I didn't know all of that at the time. At the time I was just like, I don't know what I want to do for my thesis project. I'm so confused about what I want to say as an artist. I'm just going to start at the beginning and ask my mom and her friends, my aunties, if they'll pose for me for my thesis project. And of course that just exploded into something so much larger than just that. And so I think that, you know, you're talking about the eyes closed, and, you know, this has just been something I did unconsciously, of course. It was just something I was very attracted to, was that look. And I think that I'm realizing more and more how important that is, how important it is to have an inward focus. You know, eyes closed so often in the past, and you know, we generally think of it as people just kind of, I don't know, it's just not a very comfortable place to be. And it's not confrontational. You know, we think of confrontation as being eyes directly at the viewer. But I think that I was attracted to this because of that inward strength that's represented when the eyes are closed. I'll back up a little bit. So to make my paintings, actually, I do photo shoots. I do photo shoots of, you know, for these aunties paintings that we're talking about right now, I've done photo shoots with them outside, outdoors, in a larger group of people. And what I love about that is it's very much a collaboration, and it's collaboration between me and them, and they've known me my whole life. So there's definitely comfort level there. But then it's also just a collaboration between them and the environment, you know, human beings naked out in nature. Like, that is the most natural thing. We all have that, you know, even if we never experienced that, that's still our roots. And so when I'm there, I'm just documenting, I'm just taking photos. I'm not telling them what to do. I just want to document them experiencing themselves in this natural environment with people they're comfortable with. And what ends up happening is they forget about the camera, they forget about the viewer, and there's just this inward strength, and there's this wonderful things that happen between them, interactions that happen between them. But I think what I'm really want to focus on right now is this inwardness. And, you know, I'm just thinking about COVID also, and just how we are all at home so much more. We're not with each other. And yes, we're on Zoom, so we have that perception of the outside world on us, but we're with each other, we're with ourselves more than we have ever been before. And I think that there's this sense of being kind of coming from ourselves that I think I've been trying to represent for a long time, because it's something maybe I struggle with. And then COVID is just making me see this so much more, but it's sense of coming from within ourselves, and kind of a refusal to be a refusal to kind of be driven by the perception of the outside world and the perception of the viewer. So with eyes closed, or with just the body language, how body language can come from within and not from without. So that's another reason why I love working from photography, is because I'm capturing them as they're being themselves, instead of me putting them in a pose and then they're holding that pose, being aware that I'm staring at them. Because I really want them to come from within themselves, and I want to represent that. And I just think that that is such an important thing, especially now. You know, I didn't know this in 2011, but I just feel like especially now, just to be really focusing on the inward changes, and just getting to know ourselves and becoming comfortable with ourselves. And then as the viewer seeing that in a painting, or as a viewer, as friends seeing that in friends, family members seeing that in family members. I think that's just something so beautiful and so important. So if that makes any sense, these are just things I'm really thinking about right now. And yeah, I'll stop there, but I'm sure we'll continue.
Oh, that's great, thank you. Adelaide, you've worked with your own body a lot in your own practice, but you've also kind of worked with painting, with performance, being the viewer, the artist, the subject. Has that kind of changed gradually over time? How's it evolved? Did you start as a painter and move on? Were you always working with everything at the same time?
At the moment, I would describe myself as a multidisciplinary artist who I do work with my own body in what I now call body art rather than necessarily performance art, because I think performance art, even though I've kind of been calling myself a painter and performance artist for since 2016, I've reached a point where I feel like body art, when it comes to the performative aspect of what I do, encompasses and it is a more accurate description of what it is that I do. Up until 2016, I suppose. I mean, I've been practicing since 2005. I was more of a figurative painter. Well, I was attempting to be a figurative painter as somebody who is self-taught. I was attempting to teach myself to be more of a traditional figurative painter without the advantage of studying that underneath someone, whether at university or in the more traditional sense. And it got to a point in 2015 when I had a critique by Rachel Ara, who you know, Elina, who informed me that what I was doing, she didn't feel like I was accurately depicting what she knew I wanted to depict. And at the time, I was really very much using the figure, predominantly the female figure, to discuss various social issues. And I had an awareness and an understanding of the power of the body to convey what I wanted to say, but somehow it wasn't successful. She asked me to think outside of the box. And so then, obviously that was difficult to hear, but I had to go back into the studio and really do some soul searching, some research, and came to the conclusion that I needed to use my body, and that's how I started using the body. And really, when it comes to looking at race, gender, age, obvious sexuality, differences in terms of sexuality from the norm, anybody which is at odds with those kind of normative conceptions, when of the artist specifically, when you use your body in that way, specifically performatively, I think that it helps to really expose the inherent exclusion of modernist art history and also criticism, because you stand out like a sore thumb. You can't help but expose that exclusion and that inherent sort of exclusivity of the art world. And when you do that using your body, it's such a powerful vehicle to encourage different ways of thinking about subjectivity. Using the body in that way, it means that there's a certain intersubjectivity, which means that you encourage empathy and exchange in a visceral way, which is difficult to do in other ways, more difficult, I would say, to do in other ways. And so with that, you can then attach whatever social issues you are passionate about and interested in passing on to the audience. But I feel, with the understanding that, like you say, everybody is viewing the art through their own unique lens. And so this means that as the artist, you have to be aware that you have no control over how your work is perceived, right? So therefore, multiple layers of meaning can be added on top of, especially when it comes to performance and body art specifically, on top of, or in addition to, or they could completely misunderstand what your intention was in the first place. But those multiple layers of meaning then add to the conversation. And I think that's interesting, and that's very powerful, and it encourages us to think differently about subjectivity, and also encourages a fully embodied multisensory experience via all 6 senses, which is more apparent in, I think, performance and body art than and in person, rather than on these screens where a lot of that can be lost.
I'm quite struck by the difference in using your body as the kind of locus, the space for making work, and for example in anatomy, where your body is actually almost appropriated and being used for someone else's intentions. That is quite interesting to have both that perspective, and Corinna with the anatomy. Though Corinna, I know you've got so many different research interests. I don't want to kind of condition you to just talk about in that area, so
I can maybe pick up on what has been said, and specifically what Adelaide said, because she just went last, and I'm going to refer to her work if I can. I'm just going to pull an image up on screen, if that's all right.
This is interesting. Wasn't expecting that.
are you happy with that, Adelaide?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, so we're talking about, you know, the body in the modern world, where we are now. And Adelaide mentioned, and in fact, we've all been sort of mentioning, you know, we all live with the past all the time, all of it, everywhere. It shapes us, and art is intertextual, and our ideas are intertextual. And, you know, no matter how cutting edge and how much we want to go against and be radical and pushing at envelopes, if we do, you know, we are still always shaped by tons of traditions in a history that came before us. And so the kind of writing back to previous models and images, and writing back to a kind of history, and, you know, sort of carving out for ourselves new ways of representing, I think, is really powerful. And so, like Adelaide, I am struck with a certain kind of art history, and I've got to call attention to the word anthropometry. Now, this is Adelaide's image in the bottom here, which has a great title. This is me, the inconsistency of the self. And in fact, we live in modernity, and this is an age which has been a lot about disciplining the body, surveying the body, defining, categorizing, labeling, collecting the body, and defining what is the norm and what is abnormal, what is dysfunctional or pathological. And that term anthropometry has a long history. And in the 19th century, if you look at the 3 images in a row, that's a very, I was going to say very famous, but maybe not famous for everyone, French police chief, Alphonse Bertillon, who developed the mugshot, the crime scene photo, and anthropometry. And so he wanted to measure and categorize and define bodies that he thought would be problematic. They had criminal tendencies, or they were going to be political radicals, so that they could be identified. Now, it's interesting that then Yves Klein comes along and titles his blueprints of women who he's covered in paint, and then had their bodies placed on paper covered canvas, and titled them anthropometry, because it's about measuring and defining bodies, and it's all about having a kind of power of surveillance over those bodies. And so one of the powerful things that we can do now when we, you know, take hold of the body and represent it in new ways is perhaps things like Adelaide's project there. And in my own work, when I'm working on a book that is writing and visual, I too go back and use 19th century photographic methods in order to also show how the technology and the techniques and the way of doing things is part of this process, So for Brittelon, it was the camera, and Yves Klein comes along and, you know, the body is paintbrush, but it's bodies that he controls, and they are certain types of bodies.
Aleah, you said that you worked quite often by, especially in the Auntie series, you have often posed your subjects in nature. And that's also kind of a very classical image, almost, this nude in the landscape. And I was wondering if you have this kind of conscious engagement with other paintings, or if it's just a general feeling. And you were talking about that relationship of how we interact with our environment, and I'd love to hear more about how the body interacts in that way.
Yeah, I think for me, it's actually been more of just my personal life versus art historical. I've been, you know, growing up, I grew up on Whidbey Island in Washington, and just really in the woods. And so for me, that's just been probably the place I feel most comfortable in, is any sort of nature. And so it hasn't been so much of a art historical conscious choice. It's more been, it just feels like the natural place for them to be. And whenever I've tried to have them in a space that is maybe has horizontal line, or horizontal lines are good, but, you know, some just very, 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 you know, horizontal vertical lines that are interior spaces or cityscapes. When I've tried to do that, I just feel I can't do it. I just can't paint like that. And so I think it's also that I feel the most comfortable. So, you know, as an artist, we can really only paint what we know, and everything is extremely personal. And I think that the more personal we can get, the more universal it gets as well. And so I really just wanted to paint what I wanted to see, but also where I wanted to be. And I actually used to really be scared of where the figure would be. In the early Auntie series, they were just white backgrounds, just basically the canvas. I just wanted to remove everything so we could really focus on the body. And then as the years went by, the natural environment started to seep its way through. And I think that that's because that's just what I was craving. Personally, I was living in New York City at the time. And but I also just think that, you know, as I mentioned a little bit, that is where we come from. We come from the natural world. And that's also why I don't like painting clothing. It's a similar reason, because we all have a body and we all come from nature. That is that's the essence of who we are. Even if we live in cities, you know, we come from living in caves, you know, and living in forests and living in deserts and living on the beach. You know, we come from the natural world. And so for me, that's really been the driving force. Even though, yes, historically, there is so much of the figure in landscape, and I'm sure that there's a lot, you know, in my work that someone who knows more about that could find, and I would love to hear that. I don't think I'm the person to be able to talk about that, could be just because it wouldn't be genuine, because that's not where my influence came from. Yeah,
it's interesting because you talked about and when we talked before, you were mentioning this idea of how you use the personal stories to talk about something more universal, and in a sense that's what happens automatically almost with the body, because the body is hugely personal, but at the same time it's hugely universal in many ways. I don't necessarily want to keep going around in the same order because we can break the order, but I do, Adelaide, I know that you've worked in so many different spaces with different media. And I was wondering how you feel when you interact in different spaces, when you're on your own making work or when you're with others. And also I did actually suddenly notice that in the chat, and it might get forgotten in the past, someone did say, what's the sixth sense?
Firstly, I just wanted to pick up on what you said, Corinna, with regards to the anthropometries and the this is me, the inconsistency of the self work. Well, the piece that you showed is the result of a performance that was really in conversation with Eve Klein's anthropometries performance, and the importance of, for me, I just wanted to just state this because I will forget it if I don't bring it up. For me, the importance of that particular project and of that particular work was about agency, agency of the body, and really specifically talking about it from a Black female perspective, because you said that Eve Klein was looking at very specific bodies, and this was in the 1960s, so in France. So we're talking about very young, very white, very skinny ladies, right? Yep. So here comes in 2017, a Black, not skinny lady who is directing herself in this performance to really think about agency, and not some guy in a tuxedo directing women to apply paint to themselves and produce what was very, very beautiful work. But ultimately, the feminist critique was that he was producing a passive female body, which was ripe for objectification by the male gaze. With regards to working in different spaces, when it comes to performance, it depends on the thing that I want to talk about. So, for example, with that particular performance, and I was talking about agency, and it was important for it to happen in front of an audience because of the conversation I was having with Klein. But also at the same time, it was important for me to be in front of an audience because I was feeding off their energy. And at the end of the performance, what I was doing was writing down what I was thinking and feeling from my perspective, in terms of the audience reaction to me. And it could have been little things, whispers, coughs, noticing someone was staring at my crotch, these things. And then at the end, when the people came to see the work, they could see that I was talking about them from my perspective. But then if you go to another performance, like a one that I did called Into the Mind of a Colonizer, because I'm interested in feminism, spirituality, and British colonial history, specifically as it relates to the relationship between Ghana and West Africa, which is where my family is from, and Britain, because Ghana used to be a British colony called the Gold Coast. So there's a performance that I have called Into the Mind of the Colonizer, which I've done 3 or 4 times now. And specifically, I want to point to the difference between going back to this notion of subjectivity, between audience reactions and layers of meaning. Audience reactions in the UK and Oslo versus audience reactions in New York City. In New York City, there's a whole different conversation happening and a different intensity in terms of history and context when it comes to the conversation about race, slavery, colonial history, right? To here, and there's a different kind of sensibility as well in terms of the way that people react to these conversations. And this performance drew on Yoko Ono's 1965 cut piece, which was really talking about violence against the female body. My performance, I asked the audience to come and cut my clothes after I'd finished reading from some pretty shocking texts from the colonial period, to enact violence against my body, which was a representation of Africa, and the whole conversation about the cutting up of Africa during the scramble for Africa, and the Berlin Conference. And so when I invited the audience to come and cut the clothes off, then what was revealed was skin that was covered in what looks like blood. So that's just an overview of the performance. When I did it in the UK, The audience did as they were told. They cut the clothes until the clothes came off. Then I could finish the performance by body printing onto the text that were on the floor. The same happened in Oslo. In New York, it was a different thing entirely. The audience reaction included an audience member cutting her own hair, an audience member cutting his own clothes, and the final thing was an audience member grabbing the scissors and throwing it violently against the back of the room to stop them from cutting my clothes, because he felt that it was an attack on me and he wanted to protect me. And so this added a whole other layer of meaning to the conversation that I thought I was having with the audience about this topic, which was really interesting and has become an important part of the work for me. In terms of the documentation of the work and conversations about the work, and then how I then take that work forward and think about how that impacts things when I take that work into different spaces. In terms of working in the studio, I have done performances just in the studio that didn't involve an audience, namely My Body is Present, Homage to Anna Mendieta, which was a 33-hour durational performance, did 31 hours straight in the studio. And that one was very meditative, it was exhausting, and it was a real physical challenge for me, but that I did have an awareness that there were audience members dipping in and out because it was live streamed. But really, in terms of how I felt about that audience interaction or lack of audience interaction, I didn't think about that because I was focused on the making of the work, and I wasn't thinking about well, I never am in the process actually of doing a performance. I'm focused on the thing that I'm doing in that moment, aside from in the This Is Me performance, where at the very end I'm thinking about the audience, but in the moment of doing the performance, I'm not thinking in that sort of way. So I don't know if that answers the question, but as regards to the sixth sense, really, obviously I'm aware that there are only 5 senses, but I'm thinking, when I say sixth sense, I'm talking about psychic, this kind of feeling that you have when you're in front of an audience, that feeling of the energy, and that feeding off the energy of the audience. That is quite powerful and actually can direct and change the direction of the performance depending on what it is that you're doing, especially if you've got audience participation. So yeah.
Can I just ask a very quick, or maybe, I don't know if it's a question or a comment, maybe both, but very quickly. Because I actually teach cut piece, and as you'll know, the thing that is the performance is the audience's reaction. And I think it's really fascinating to observe not only the differences between audiences based on location, but also the difference in the way the audiences generally react with the passage of whatever it is, 30 years, 40 years. How many years is it? Yeah. Because when Yoko Ono did that in New York, I mean, it was shocking how violent it got towards her. And so did that interest you, that the passage of time, how it has shaped audiences or have different attitudes?
Yeah, but you have to put it into the context is history, isn't it? So what was happening at that time?
Yeah.
So we're talking about a time where, whether it's talking about free love, or we're talking about the Vietnam War, we're talking about post-colonial movements, all of this stuff was happening at the time that would have injected some kind of different kind of energy into audience members. And so, yeah, they were thinking about and reacting in an emotional way because of the context. Yeah, so it's different times.
Yeah, and hopefully the audience, on the positive side, it would appear that the male audience reacted in a completely different way.
Yeah. It was amazing to me.
Have
every time I do that specific, I mean, there's another performance I've done which was about sexual harassment, which also involved cutting clothes as well, but there always seems to be this feeling of them wanting to protect me, which I didn't expect. You go into a performance like that, and especially knowing the history of these kind of cuttings sorts of things, whether it's Yoko Ono or Marina Abramovich, her Rhythm O, you know, when you think about those histories, you have no way of predicting how the audience is going to react. And as the artist, you have to accept you have to accept you could get hurt.
Yeah.
And that then becomes a part of the performance. The first time I did the colonizer performance, someone was cutting my skirt and the scissors like kind of dug into my leg. If that scissors was a little bit sharper, I could have got cut. But I had to accept that that could happen, and that's a part of the performance.
I feel like what we're talking about here, a lot of it seems like it's about self-ownership. And I know, Elina, you brought that up at the very beginning. And I'm just, I don't know if there's a question or comment as well, but I'm wondering if you guys feel like kind of this, we're becoming more of a self-ownership society. I feel like we're really becoming much more like that. And I'm wondering if empathy is growing because of that as well. So the more we get in touch with ourselves, the more people are empathetic. You know, they're aware of I'm cutting and I could get hurt, so I'm going to be more gentle. And I'm just wondering if that is, if other people have kind of perceived that over time, that change that might be happening of self-ownership kind of leading to more empathy as culture. And, you know, maybe America is different, UK is different. But yeah, just curious about that.
Performance, body art, in that performative side of body art, the very nature of it encourages intersubjectivity, right? And that encourages this exchange and empathy by its very nature, because the fact is that the space between the artist, the artwork, and the audience, when it comes to doing performance with the body, is collapsed. So if it's collapsed in that way, there's no other way for it to go, unless you're not human, than to feel. And if that happens, then, and you know, you're going to have growing empathy in those types of situations, which is very powerful.
No, it's so interesting because you actually get to experience what the audience is as they're experiencing the work. I don't. I'll spend a year working on a show in my studio pretty much alone. And then the work goes out in the world and people have experiences, but I'm not able to witness that besides maybe being at an opening, but it's, you know, it's a little bit different. But I just think that's an interesting difference between the ways that we work, is that you really get to experience that. You know, and I'm just getting I'm getting a very intimate experience with the models that I'm painting, whether it's myself or the aunties or friends. You know, I'm getting to know them so extremely well in my own way, but then I'm not aware of the viewer part of it. So I get to kind of leave that out of it. But yeah, it's just interesting.
I never take the glass half empty view, but I mean, there is also the argument that, you know, increased individualism is the other side of this, which is that, you know, people are less empathetic and we seem to have, well, for lack of a better word, I mean, there's all kinds of daily sadistic, I mean that in the general sense, like really cruel things happening all the time. And we sort of, I mean, oh my God, politics. But we seem to
not gonna start on that,
yeah, but it almost seems like we have no choice but to accept it. Perhaps
it's also the I think also the internet is, you know, is a lot of that cause of not being empathetic. Is because it's just a little, you know, we can just close it and then that person's gone, so we don't have that human interaction, that person directly in front of us who's going to feel hurt when we say something, or so no, I'm glass half full, glass half empty. I think that both things are true. I definitely feel, you know, I definitely feel like the more self-ownership we have, there's the potential to have more empathy, but there's absolutely the potential to have less, because we're not paying attention, and the internet has definitely caused a lot of that issue. But I also think the internet has, in a way, the other side of it is the internet has, at least what I'm seeing, is a whole shift to personal. very, very personal, people getting so personal and just really honest. And that, you know, is not always the case, but I'm seeing this thread, at least in the US, that happening. And I don't know, I think it's just gonna be really interesting to see how all of this shifts and changes us as well as individuals.
I think it's really interesting, this idea of self-development and how it has a kind of reflexive influence on how we interact with others, because in a sense, to have a developed sense of self-awareness, there needs to be a form of meta understanding of your interaction with your environment, with the other. And so by very virtue of kind of moving away from this kind of umbilical vision, you're necessarily putting yourself in a relational kind of context. Now, some people might do that in a very aware way, and it might still be one that has very questionable motives, but I do think there's this kind of necessary awareness of the other when we become more aware of ourselves. And so it's an interesting idea, at the same time as having kind of this complete dislocation.
Since we're talking about awareness of others as we become self-aware, to throw the body into this, because I just think this is so applicable. I had a really fascinating conversation with a very accomplished criminal psychologist, and he said that the problem with people who commit terrible crimes to people they don't know is that they are self-aware, but they only see the other person as a body, not as a person. And therefore they are able to do horrific things. And to bring that back to the internet, in some ways, when we see really bad people have very bad behaviors on the internet, oftentimes it's towards somebody who there is a kind of self-awareness, and they're sharing personal things, and often it's images of the body, as we know, that certain people feel that they can treat that person as a body only and not a person. I'm always positive, so I have to put in the negative stuff today.
That's a fascinating idea, because it brings up that mind-body dualism again, and the different kind of, in a sense, the rational is something that we usually don't empathize with, because it becomes extremely rational. But at the same time, if the body becomes too abstracted, we can't identify and empathize it with it either, because it doesn't have the human rationality there. So again, it shows how false the kind of Cartesian divides or rationalist divides that happen between mind, body, they're so violent, really, because the two are so intertwined.
I think it's time to bring the human.
Oh, go on. No,
really
go
quick.
on.
I think
Go
it's
ahead.
just generally in time to bring the human back into the body. You know, we need to bring the individual back into the body and bring the humanness. And by humanness, I mean like our personalities, our hopes, our dreams, our desires, our fears. That needs to be in the body. And if we look at, you know, history, that has almost been extracted, especially women. You know, it's just been a body. And I think that, you know, what Adelaide is doing, what I'm doing, we're really trying to bring the human back into the body and own that. It's all in there.
Yeah, agreed.
My question is for Aleah this time. I have been squirming in my seat to ask you about your technical approach to your paintings, because your aesthetic is so specific to you, and the way you make your bodies look, the lighting you use, just the look of your work is so unique. So I was curious to see if you could talk a little about your technical approach.
I mean, ideally, I would just show you guys, but obviously I can't do that right now. So really quick, I take photographs. I might take 600, 800 photos in a photo shoot over maybe an hour or two. And this is from my past work. My work is actually beginning to change, but you guys will see that sometime next year. But this past work has been, so I take a bunch of photos and then I'm looking through the photographs. I haven't I'm really deciding what I want to express because of what I've discovered in the photo shoots. And then from there, you know, if it's a really complex painting that has a lot of, you know, I'm actually going to skip the whole how I get to the image, because your question, we don't have tons of time, and your question is about technique, so actual painting technique. So I don't do an under drawing with drawing material. I actually just use paint, and I might do a really rough grid, maybe like 1 foot by 1 foot grid for these giant canvases. So I make sure I have everything kind of in the right place, and then I try to get that complete in one day. Just a really big rough painted rough-in of the painting with this color called Brown Pink by Aleah. And then what I'm doing is I'm just going right in with paint and with color. I'm keeping the paint pretty thin, and I'm using a fairly small brush. And what's happening is from there, after each layer dries, I'm adding another layer. So it's layer after layer, and I might have 2 layers in one area. I might have 8 layers in another area. It kind of just depends on what the painting needs. And what I'm really trying to get at is a weaving together of brush marks. And something that is really important to me is to bring the painting to life. I want the painting to be feeling very much alive and not like a flat photograph. So I'm embracing the accidents, I'm embracing the brush marks, you know, oh, I got the wrong color on there. That's okay. I'm just going to weave it in. And then that's how the painting actually feels alive, because each brush mark has an intention, but it also has this life, it has this accident, and it's just layer after layer after layer. And I'm definitely glazing in there, and then I'm floating in opaque paint. And it sort of builds up, and I'm thinking about sculpting, and I'm thinking about how the brush marks are describing a sense of the form in 3 dimension, not just flat. So really quickly, if that gave you anything in words describing painting, accidents for me are that's how the life gets in there. So embrace the accidents.
You brought up agency, and then Corinna went off of this and talked about, you know, like the rise of the individual. So in terms of existing in, you know, like late stage capitalism, as we do, where non-normativity is so much commercialized and commodified, and we no longer view things as only normal and abnormal. The abnormal is also categorized. How do you find navigating agency in both your work and your body when, you know, everything is kind of performative, and is going to be seen in different ways?
That's a great question. The only way to answer it is to say that you just do. Like, for me, it's all about self-awareness and authenticity in action. And so for me to stay true to myself, I spend a lot of time in introspection, and I spend a lot of time researching all of the things that I'm interested in, and also researching art history. And when it comes to the execution, I just do. Like, you have to psychologically disengage from a lot of the rubbish that's going on out there. Obviously, it's impossible for it not to impact and affect you. But I feel like when you reach a certain level of maturity and self-awareness, and you're keeping yourself true to your craft, and to what it is that you do, and you're passionate about that, and that comes across authentically, that's all you can really do, as well as whilst simultaneously engaging in the conversation, because we live in the world, right? You can't not engage in the conversation, and that engaging in the conversation authentically is also going to feed into the work, because I always think that art is always a reflection of the spirit of the times. Doesn't matter who you are as an artist, you can't help it. You cannot help but reflect the spirit of the times, even when you're trying not to, right? When we look back in 50 years, 100 years, we look back on this moment, it's the artists who are going to be describing what is happening right now. So yeah, all you can do is just do. in conclusion.
And yeah, I would 100% agree with that. All you can do is just do, and also, like, we can't help it be a reflection of the times, because we are the times. You know, we are part of the times. Whatever we're feeling, whether we're super engaged or less engaged, we're still the times. And I think the way that I try to kind of stay true to myself and my own vision is similar, like really a lot of self-reflection, and really going inward and actually starting to feel things. So for me, I work much more from an intuitive space, and that might be that, you know, I can kind of feel it in my body if this is the right image that I want to dive into and explore, if this is the direction I want to take this image in, or if this, you know, is this facial expression is this facial expression or body language quite the right tone that I'm trying to do, or is it something slightly different? And I'm not thinking about it so much. I'm really trying to get in touch with my body, because I feel like that's sort of where my subconscious lives. And so I'm trying to kind of tap into that subconscious. And when I can tap into that, then it flows. It's not always like that, but definitely when you can tap into whatever access point that is for you, then you kind of just can flow, and then you just do.
Yeah, that's the key. The key is flow. Like there's a whole scientific study of this idea of getting into flow. Like when you've practiced something so much, you've done the thing so many times, it becomes intuitive. So such that when you're performing the action, whether it's painting, whether it's performance, whatever that is, that the thing that is that you're so practiced in, the thing just happens. It comes from your subconscious mind. And in that way, that's how you get to that point of authenticity, whereby you are accurately reflecting what's going on inside in an authentic way. And then at that point, that's when people can really, really, truly connect with what it is that you're doing.
Yeah, and you have to show up. You just have to show up to the studio to make that happen. It doesn't just happen and then you follow. You have to show up, and then hopefully you can tap in. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for that question.
Yeah, and it was really interesting in our group, because it opened up this idea of when an act of reivindication, there's this kind of window when an act of reivindication can then be capitalized on and start becoming kind of almost commodified in its moment. And so in a sense, in your responses, there's this notion of the importance of being very clearly linked to the intentionality behind the work. And if you work with other people, for example, to create a very intimate and genuine relationship with those people who kind of come into the workspace. So there's always, and it's something that came up with Aleah's working with other people, and actually the intimacy with your models and the people that you represent. Even the words model and sitter are accurate. Every time they come out of my mouth, I always think they don't seem right. They categorize and they other and they appropriate into our work, into the work that we do, in this kind of I'm casting my way of looking onto you, and that's a really
more of an object. Yeah, become more of an object that way, I think, with those words. Yeah.
I have to say something about the other side of working, though, particularly since I know that I have some of my students here, which is that the authenticity and the flow and those kinds of things are awesome and wonderful, but the other side of it is, and everybody has different projects and they work differently, but also if you're doing other kinds of projects, it's about research and really, really thinking about what it is you're doing and researching the history behind it, if it is about that, and knowing about, we talked about emotions and affect and its relation to history, and thinking about those things as preparation.
Yeah, 100%.
If in doubt, ask the people who you think need to be involved in the conversation. Create a conversation.
When you do something that society considers fairly like doing the older bodies that Aleah did, or with Adelaide, when she was doing, you're putting yourself really out there, and then you get the blowback from society. How does that inform your practice? And do you have to go back into yourself, or is that just keeping centered in yourself and keep going on your mission? Or how did that affect you in you and your work?
Blake and I actually shared a studio our first year of graduate school, so we were in this tiny little space together. So she saw like the very beginnings of all of this. But yeah, so as you know, you probably remember a little bit, there's definitely there was some pushback to when I started making these paintings. And but I also had made a decision that during these 2 years of graduate school, I was just gonna say, kind of, fuck it, sorry, anyone French, like, I'm just gonna paint what I want to paint and not care what's gonna sell or what society will think, because this is my precious 2 years in graduate school. And there was definitely some pushback, and that was difficult to experience. But mainly it was pushback not about my technical abilities. It was actually more about the models themselves. And that hurt really badly, because I had put these women that I love in this position of being criticized. And this happened especially with the painting Auntie that won the BP Portrait Award. And there was some definite pushback. And the way that I kind of dealt with that is realizing that I'd gotten a reaction. It's obviously something that needs to be said. If some people are getting so angry about this painting being out in the world, it needs to be out in the world. We need images like this. We need images of these women who have been invisible. And in our conversation breakout room, we were talking about how, you know, it's older women are not a minority, but they're sort of treated as one. They're very much invisible. And so, yeah, the way that I sort of deal with any sort of pushback that I get is just, you know, saying, well, good, I'm glad that I'm obviously doing something. I'm doing something that is causing people to think, to get angry, to have some friction, and that, you know, that's good. That's how we move society forward.
Yeah, I would have to just to agree with that. I haven't had massive amounts of pushback aside from the anthropometry's "This is me, the inconsistency of the self" performance. I had one very strange guy who started attacking me on social media, basically saying that the work was unoriginal, which I'm completely fine with people saying that kind of stuff, but he started to get extremely personal and unnecessarily rude, saying that he would stamp all over the work and Eve Klein was the master and this kind of stuff. And I wasn't contributing to the conversation. It got quite nasty. And I thought it was, the first message, I thought it was funny. And then he just kept on going. And I ignored him. I completely ignored him. And then what happened was very interesting. He went away and actually read up about why I was doing what I was doing, rather than just reacting to the pictures of the performance and the pictures of the work. And came back and apologized. And said, you know, I've just gone in, I've read your story, I've read your backstory, I've read all of the thinking that went into the reasoning behind why you did that work, and could see that you definitely researched it. And I want to say hats off to you. I apologize sincerely for insulting you. I didn't know the context that you were coming from, and I've learned so much from this, and blah, blah, blah. It turned out that basically he considered himself to be a failed artist, and he was just attacking someone who he felt was getting accolades that I didn't deserve. So that was interesting. But for me, that experience, it was a little bit hurtful at the time, but it was also funny. But it was also a reminder to always keep doing what Corinne was saying, which is, for me, at the very core of everything I do is this Ghanaian concept of Sankofa, which means it's important to understand your history in order that you do not repeat the same mistakes from the past. So all of whenever I'm engaging with artist from the past, I always make sure that I am thoroughly researching what I do, because I have this added insecurity, which is that my degree is in applied biology, it's not in fine art. So I'm constantly researching, whether it's from an art historical perspective, whether it's philosophy or whatever, all of these intellectual things that I'm trying to inject into the work to make sure that I'm confident when it comes to speaking about the work. And if I do get attacked, that's fine, my feelings may get hurt, but ultimately I'm going to be able to defend what it is that I do. And I think that's important to me, is to be able to defend what it is that I do, but also that connection with history to make the work relevant.
I know, Corinna, now your project that you're working on at the moment is a link between research and your own work as well. So I'd love you to kind of talk about that.
So yeah, so I'm a writer and I'm a photographer. I'm sorry, all you painters. I heard Aleah say the flat photograph. I have wax on my photograph.
Mean that. I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just a
No, it's
painting.
okay.
A painting can't be a photograph. A painting is something different.
No.
Yeah.
No, I totally no. Just teasing. So yeah, so I'm interested in because I'm a writer, word and image, and because I'm a researcher, research historical stuff and autobiographical stuff. It's a mix. Creative nonfiction writing. So I'm doing a book for Bloomsbury, which is I'm doing Victorian process photographs, like cyanotypes, if anyone knows what those are.
Yes, I work with cyanotypes.
Oh, you're
Love
kidding.
cyanotype.
Oh, I'm so into the blue. Yeah, in so many ways. But with writing, yeah. So I do a mix of stuff. I guess that's something perhaps some of us have in common. Is I feel like multi, totally mixed. It's a pot of stuff, and I think that's an exciting thing that's happening right now too. And I love the connections between word and image. And,
Yes, we do.
Yeah, so that's where I'm at.
I'm interested in the issue of vulnerability. I find even just standing, I did an exercise once in an acting group where you just stood and people just observed you. You were under a spotlight in a darkened room and people observed you. And it was, my heart was racing. It was an exercise for people who don't normally perform. So, and the idea of performing to me is terrifying. I see performance as being more powerful. Painting, when you have the product in front of you, is just a footprint of what went on. Like if I was painting a portrait, the thing that's important to me is the experience. So that's really maybe the equivalent of performance in a way, sort of, except that it isn't, because the sitter is the vulnerable. The sitter is vulnerable. The artist makes themselves vulnerable to the process. If it's, in my opinion, if it's worth doing, you make yourself vulnerable to the process and to the medium. I've done a lot of life drawing, and I find it really difficult to use the model. Well, initially I realized, oh, the model's like a bowl of fruit. You know, they're not a person in a way. They're because technically I'm doing it to achieve these skills. But I also realized that once I started doing this more, the personality, even when a person's just modeling for money, their personality comes through and you start to feel them and you start to respect that. And I found it really difficult to use that model in a way that obliterated who they were. And I'd be in sessions where people would just use the torso. There would be no head, and they would be using this model to practice making abstractions. And I found it really difficult to do that. I guess, yeah, so that kind of brings up the thing about abstraction and how using the model just as a jumping off point to make an abstraction, and it kind of obliterates that idea of personality.
I've worked with an absolutely amazing group called Spirited Bodies, and they actually organize sessions where they organize life modeling, but it's a far more interactive process. It questions this idea of activity on one side and passivity on the other side. And it's really interesting, this notion of how it's impossible to appropriate. And I think that sometimes when we're working with a model, we do kind of say, I have this vision and I'm going to mold you to it. And that's something that's being questioned. And I think again, it's all about questioning. It's about questioning the structures, but not just the way in which we work, but the way in which the life room is set up, the way in which the conventions are set up, all of these different things that are at play.
When we were discussing the kind of bodies that disappear or usually are omitted from art, I was thinking about this recent exhibition called Portraying Pregnancy. It's, I think, from this year. It's an exhibition at the Foundling Museum of Pregnant Women in British Art.
Yeah.
And that's super interesting because it basically traces material over the past 500 years and how women have deliberately been portrayed as not pregnant, even though the sitters have, I mean, there has been evidence that sitters have been pregnant. So yeah, that's again something that we have carried on for so long, because even today, the pregnant body becomes a spectacle, right? It's something that's abnormal, even though there's probably nothing more natural. It brings me back to this very interesting article by Leslie Sharp. It's called Commodification of the Body and Its Parts. She talks about how the focus that is supposed to be on the pregnant body is shifted to fetishizing the fetus, and how the fetus becomes the spectacle and the pregnant body disappears, and it becomes a tool to achieve your final goal, which is basically to use the female body to reproduce. And it's fascinating because I just found another work that describes recent technological advancement in assisted reproductive technology. And I love how she describes it. She says, these reproductive technologies that are making it less necessary for women to be present as a part of pregnancy are basically providing the final solution to the women problem, which is making men free from the humiliating dependence on women to procreate. So I think that's a very wonderful way to put it.
The Body Worlds exhibitions.
Yeah.
Does everybody know what those are? The Body Worlds exhibitions?
Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I saw those years ago.
Yeah.
So
they're huge exhibitions. They've been all over the world since the early 80s. And Gunther von Hagens, who owns the franchise, it's a huge world franchise, has plastinated bodies. So they were real bodies, and he preserved them, and he puts them in various, I mean, it's just crazy if you're not, if you've never seen it, just to Google it. But he puts them into, you know, a man on a horse, or a smoking man, or someone playing basketball or whatever. But the reason I mention that is because there was a case in London, and I think this is just really illustrative of what Sakshi was saying. in London some years ago who stormed into body worlds and threw red paint at the pregnant body, which was cut so that you could see the fetus inside the body, which is very like anatomical drawings. But anyways, and when he was in court, they said, why did you throw red paint in it? Why that one? He said, I don't know. I don't know. I can't articulate it. There's just something wrong with showing a pregnant body. And I always was struck by that, of all these bodies on display, and there's so many and all different kinds of body parts in the Body Worlds exhibition, why that one? And yet it isn't an easy articulation about what it is that is, we have this problematic relationship and have had one for a long time with that particular body. Just to add.
It's also interesting because in anatomy, originally, quite often women were reduced to reproductive function. So the body was actually almost, the male body became, it's a little bit like crash test dummies.
Yes.
It still carries on that tradition that actually use the male body to stand in for all bodies except for particular functions. And so the female body was very much kind of used as pointing out, this is a uterus and this is how it's an inverted male anatomy, or this is, and so there's this kind of really strange history there.
You've brought up the issue of appropriation of the model's body, performance in that regard, and agency, those three issues. In my occupation, having one's likeness used is an occupational hazard. And I just wanted, to speak to the notion to which the model is collaborative. And so it's not unlike the role of an actor in that regard. It's different than when you have your portrait painted, but it's collaborative, like the role of an actor, and to see if and you may perform every different kind of role, but that's their prerogative. And so if the artist could comment on the notion that it's a collaborative process, and the sitter is doing a job to assist in the vision of the agency of the artist, which is primary.
I have from the very beginning felt like it's a collaborative experience, 100%. So I guess I don't have too much to say except for just that I completely agree with that notion, and I think that that's something that perhaps is more new. I think perhaps in art history, and maybe Corinna can talk to this more. Perhaps in the past, it's very much been more a model, kind of as an object and a placeholder, and expressing what the artist wants to present. But perhaps now, and I know with my work, it's very much of a collaboration, and I really trying to work with the model, and it really, really matters who the model is and who they are in that day, their feelings and emotions in that day, and so I think it's just really important, and perhaps becoming more important in art in general than it used to be.
Was the pushback from the BP Auntie portrait, was it because it was out of the main and not the classical idea of beauty, and that age had something to do with it?
There was some white male critic, older white male critic, who just hated it. He just really did not want to see the body of a naked older woman painted and honored in this way. It was just very offensive to him, and he was very much of a traditionalist and just found this incredibly offensive. And yeah, so that was really the main pushback. And then there was definitely comments basically to that, just like, I don't want to see this. Why is this out there? I don't want to see this. This is horrific or terrible. It's just awful to know that is something that people think. But again, that is become one of the reasons why I've continued to do this, is because we need these images to actually become more normal and not so shocking. And yeah, we need these images. We need to have these conversations. They need to become less of a taboo. Not that it can't, affect you in a way, but just to become more of the norm. more accepted.
When I paint, I start out by thinking of the person I'm painting, like as an individual. And then I go gradually deeper into the subject so that I can find the universal meaning. And then that person takes on, you know, the, I don't know how you describe it. It does the work of being representing certain ideas, a certain, you know, it has a meaning. Especially Aleah, you know, what your take on that is, how much you think of them as individuals to begin with, and then how you approach what you're saying universally.
I love what you said, and I love that way that you described it. And I think the way that I work is pretty similar, because I know these people so well. Most of the people I painted I've known quite well, not everyone, but and I think that the entry point for me is that personal connection of knowing them. And so that's where I enter. I don't know what the larger message is, and I'm not trying to say what the larger message is, because for me, I feel like that's not exactly my job at that point in time. My job is to really portray them and get to know them and just be with them. You know, I'm with their image, but I'm with them. And then I found that the more personal I can get, the more specific I can get, that might be, I'm talking about like specifics about like or a wrinkle. I mean, it's, or a facial expression. The more personal I can get, that's when the universal stories begin to happen. They grow from that place. They grow, so it kind of goes in personal, and then the rest happens, and I'm not in control of the rest. That happens, I think, when the viewer comes to the painting and they have their own experience, or when months later I have my own experience and then I see that in the painting that I wasn't aware of early on. But my entry point is always the person, and then the rest is kind of happens from there.
I love this idea of kind of time creeping back in, because time in a sense was present when Adelaide was talking about her 33-hour performance, and it's present in the way in which we respond to the process, but also the reception of the work. And Corinna, I know that actually the image that we used in the poster was one of your photographs where time sometimes actually goes so far as obliterating the human body. And I'd love you to kind of talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so in photography, so I'm engaging with historical uses of photography, and the big potential, the big promise of photography was originally to be documentary. It would tell the truth, and it would show you things about the body that your eye would not see. So for instance, psychiatric photography promised to somehow reveal, in some weird way, the lesions in the brain by studying the external body, whereas the psychiatrist's eye could not observe things on the body that would give him hints about that. So it's sort of engaging with that early promise of photography. And so I use large format 8x10 negatives and stuff called direct positive paper, which just prints the image directly on the paper and then you develop it. And weird cameras like pinhole cameras and things. But the point of that is that super long exposures. And so it challenges the idea that you'll capture things on the image that the eye would not see. So I have an image, for instance, I set the camera up in my bedroom for 48 hours. And so I slept there, I changed, I had books there, I had all this sort of stuff. And you can just make out the shadow of, books and shoes on the floor, and the bed is the bed, and you can't see anybody. So even though you slept there for 2 blocks of 8 hours, or at least tossed and turned for 2 blocks of 8 hours, unsleeping, there's no image left on the photograph. So your body is erased. The fact that you were there is erased, and there's just these shadows, these specters of bits of your life. And it was interesting to do that in lockdown,
I just want to say thank you, Aleah Chapin, Adelaide Damoah Corinna Wagner. It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you, everyone who is here. There are so many fascinating voices who are participants in the dialogues as well. And it feels like such a constructive process. So thank you all for being here. I learn so much every time we organize one of these sessions.
Thank you, Elina, for putting this together and doing, I know there's a lot of work that goes behind this. You know, we all had conversations with you before. And so just wanted to thank you and acknowledge how much work you put into these. And it feels very good to have these kinds of conversations when the rest of the world, at least in America, we're really having there's a lot of crap going on. So it feels great, very good for my soul to have these conversations. So thank you. And thank you all for being here.
I second that, Elina. I know how much work has gone into this, man. It's a lot. So, and also it's aside from being interesting, it's also very helpful and very mind-opening to have this kind of conversation with other professionals who are, because a lot of the time as artists we're all in our own headspaces by ourselves, and especially after lockdown, just here doing our work. So yeah, it's been very helpful, very interesting, and broadening, good for the soul. So yeah, thank you so much. It's been amazing.
Thank you so much. I think I am gonna let everybody go home now, although I would love to kind of keep it on, but we've been going for more than 2 hours. It's been such a fascinating conversation. Thank you to everyone who's here, everyone who's stayed all the time. Please come back. The dialogues are on the 1st of every month, and there'll be lots of conversations coming back. I'm sure the body will come back into the conversations because it's something so present in the way in which we work culturally, the narratives that we construct, the way in which we live and exist. So thank you so much again to our fantastic speakers. I can't say thank you enough. Thank you to the brilliant questions. Thank you for participating in the breakout rooms. It's been absolutely wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
It was the total
Thanks.
privilege.
Bye. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Stay safe.